Wilds just became one of the most hated games on Steam, and it has very little to do with the actual gameplay. For this video, we're going to be talking about a game that went from being Capcom's biggest success story to having over 8,300 overwhelmingly negative reviews in just the past week. This isn't some indie flop or cash grab. This is a AAA masterpiece with an 89 Metacritic score that's now sitting at mixed reviews because players literally cannot play it properly. But here's what makes this story absolutely infuriating. The game underneath all these technical disasters is actually pretty good. Yeah, some people have issues with it maybe being too easy or they're not a fan in that way, but overall, that's not what the negative sentiment is about. So what went so catastrophically wrong that a potential Game of the Year contender is being review bombed into oblivion? The answer reveals a dark, ugly truth about modern gaming that affects every single one of us, and it's getting worse every year. So let me take you back to February 28th, 2025. Monster Hunter Wilds launched to what can only be described as universal critical acclaim. We're talking about review scores that most developers can only dream of. 89 on OpenCritic with a staggering 95% recommendation rate from critics. Metacritic gave it an 88 based on over 100 professional reviews. Gaming outlets were calling it not just the best Monster Hunter game ever made, but one of the finest action RPGs of the generation. And honestly, the numbers backed up the hype. Monster Hunter Wilds didn't just succeed, it absolutely shattered records. It became Capcom's most played title in Steam history, moving over 10 million copies in its first month alone, which yeah, that could be because it released on Steam day one, but still record-breaking for Capcom. And now let's put that into perspective here. That's 1/3 of what Monster Hunter World sold over 7 years, and this was achieved in just 30 days. Players were praising everything. The refined combat system that felt both familiar and revolutionary, the breathtaking world design that made every environment feel alive, and monster encounters that were genuinely thrilling. Now, again, I know there are some people out there who don't agree, but this was the overall sentiment. And so for the purpose of this video, I'm not going to talk about the reviews where they are complaining about the content itself, because this is about something very specific. Something started happening that nobody expected. About 2 months after launch, the honeymoon period began to end, and players started noticing problems. Not strictly with the game design, not necessarily with the content, but with something far more fundamental. The game simply didn't work properly, and that's what I want to talk about today. Because initially these reports were scattered. A few complaints here and there about frame rate drops, some stuttering during intensive sequences, the kind of issues you might expect from any new PC release that would hopefully get patched out within a few weeks. We shouldn't have to deal with this, but currently we are. With this game though, those patches didn't fix the problems. In fact, players started reporting the updates were somehow making things worse. So fast forward to today. We are witnessing one of the most dramatic falls from grace in recent gaming history. Monster Hunter Wilds now sits at mixed overall reviews on Steam, with recent reviews being overwhelmingly negative. We're talking about over 2,000 negative reviews in just 1 week alone. The current concurrent player count has plummeted to just over 6,000 players, and here's the kicker. That's actually lower than Monster Hunter World, a 7-year-old game that regularly goes on sale for $20. That's when I bought it. Players are writing reviews saying things like, "My grandma runs better than this game," and calling it a broken mess. These aren't trolls or people trying to hate on the series. These are verified purchasers who've put dozens, sometimes hundreds of hours into the game, desperately wanting it to work. But what's actually going on under the hood here? Let me break down the technical nightmare that Monster Hunter Wilds has become, because this isn't just the game runs a little slow. We're talking about fundamental game-breaking issues that make the experience actively frustrating. First, let's talk about frame rates. Players with high-end Graphics cards that cost more than some people's entire gaming setups are reporting unplayable frame rates. We're not talking about dipping from 144 FPS to 120 FPS here. These are people with cutting-edge hardware struggling to maintain 40 frames per second. 40 frames! Even when they drop the settings to medium or low, which, let's face it, that is atrocious, some players report frame rates as low as 10 to 20 FPS during combat. But low frame rates are just the beginning. Players are experiencing constant shuddering that makes the game feel like you're watching a slideshow rather than playing a smooth action game. I mean, just imagine trying to time a dodge roll against a massive monster when your game freezes for half a second every few moments. It's not just frustrating, it makes the core gameplay loop completely broken. And then there are the crashes. Oh, the crashes. And I'm not talking about occasional crashes that you might expect from any PC game, even though that's unacceptable. Players are reporting crashes so frequent that they can't complete basic story missions. Some people report crashing every 15 to 20 minutes. Others say the game crashes as soon as they try to load into certain areas. There are entire Steam forum threads dedicated to people who literally cannot get past the opening sequence because the game crashes consistently at the same point. One player even reported taking a day off work specifically to play Monster Hunter Wilds, only to spend the entire day troubleshooting crashes instead of actually playing. Poor guy, that's not a minor inconvenience. That's a product that simply doesn't work. I mean, the visuals are even equally as problematic. Players are reporting texture streaming problems where the world literally looks like it's melting as you move through it. High-resolution textures just fail to load altogether, and leaving environments looks like something from the early 2000s. Some lighting glitches that cause entire areas to flash between bright and dark. Some players report that particle effects, which are crucial for understanding monster attacks and environmental hazards, just simply don't render properly. And here's what really highlights how broken the optimization is. Monster Hunter Wilds runs poorly on Steam Deck, despite the deck handling much more demanding titles like Cyberpunk 2077, Elden Ring, and even newer releases without major issues. When a handheld device can run ray-traced games smoothly but struggles with your title, something is just fundamentally wrong with your engine optimization. Players with identical hardware setups are even reporting completely different performance levels. One person with an RTX 4060 laptop claims to get 90 FPS on high settings, while another with a desktop RTX 4070 can barely maintain 30 FPS on low settings. This kind of inconsistency suggests deep-rooted optimization problems that go beyond simple hardware requirements. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so one game has problems. One big game, but just one has problems, right? That's unfortunate, but not exactly earth-shattering. But here's the thing. Monster Hunter Wilds isn't an anomaly. It's part of a disturbing new pattern that's been growing worse every year, and it's systematically destroying some of the most promising games in the industry. Let me take you back, far back, to 2015 and Batman Arkham Knight, a game that should serve as the textbook example of how poor optimization can completely destroy what could have been a masterpiece. This wasn't some small indie developer's first rodeo either. This was Rocksteady Studios, the team behind the beloved Arkham Asylum and Arkham City, working with Warner Bros.' massive budget and resources. Batman Arkham Knight was supposed to be the epic conclusion to one of the most celebrated superhero game trilogies ever made. The console versions worked beautifully. Smooth frame rates, gorgeous visuals, satisfying combat. But the PC version, it was such a disaster that Warner Bros. Took the unprecedented step of completely pulling the game from Steam. Not reducing the price, not offering refunds, they literally made it impossible to buy the game. The problems were even eerily similar to what we're seeing with Monster Hunter Wilds. Players with high-end hardware were getting frame rates in the 20s and 30s. The game had a hard-coded 30 FPS cap that players had to manually edit files to remove. Texture streaming was so broken that the game would run out of VRAM on 8 gig graphics cards that should have handled it easily, at least that's what I would think, right? That's what anyone would assume. But driving the Batmobile, one of the game's main new features, was virtually unplayable due to stuttering and frame drops. It took Warner Bros. An entire year to fix the game to an acceptable state, and even today, nearly a decade later, players still report performance issues with Arkham Knight. An entire year of development time and resources that should have been spent in creating new content instead went to fixing problems that should never have existed in the first place. Let's talk about the most expensive lesson apparently never learned. Cyberpunk 2077, which might be a perfect example of how optimization problems can destroy not just a game, but an entire company's reputation. CD Projekt Red went from being one of the most beloved developers in the industry, the studio behind The Witcher 3, to being a cautionary tale almost overnight. Cyberpunk 2077 was supposed to be the next generation of RPGs. 8 years in development, massive budget, incredible marketing campaign that had people convinced this would be the game that defined the 2020s. And underneath all the technical problems was genuinely one of the most ambitious and well-designed games ever created. But none of that mattered when players couldn't actually experience it properly. On PC, the game was barely playable without high-end hardware. And on consoles, the platforms where most people expected to play it, it was often completely broken. I mean, we're talking about frame rates dropping into the single digits, textures that wouldn't load, NPCs that would disappear or behave erratically, and crashes that could corrupt save files. The financial impact was beyond devastating. Sony pulled the game from the store entirely, something that had never happened to a major AAA release. CD Projekt Red's stock price crashed by over 75%. They had to offer unconditional refunds, which cost them millions. More importantly, they lost the trust of millions of players who had supported them through the entire Witcher series. Ultimately, yeah, they did end up clawing their way back into good graces and got something that worked. But these aren't isolated incidents from years past. Look at recent releases. Gotham Knights launched with optimization so poor that players with above recommended specs were experiencing major CPU bottlenecks and frame rate issues. Star Wars Jedi Survival was plagued with stuttering problems caused by poor threading optimization. The Callisto Protocol had such severe performance issues that it overshadowed what was otherwise a decent survival horror experience. Even Capcom themselves seem to be making this a pattern. Dragon's Dogma 2, released just months before Monster Hunter Wilds, had similar optimization problems that many players felt were never properly addressed. It's starting to feel like competent PC optimization has become the exception rather than the rule that it should be. So why does this keep happening? I personally think the answer lies in the modern game development process. And take my opinion for what it's worth, but I think the economic pressures that drive the development process are a big problem. Game development has become incredibly expensive. AAA titles now cost hundreds of millions of dollars to create. Publishers are under enormous pressure to recoup these investments quickly, which means hitting specific release dates becomes more important than technical polish. There's also what is called in the development industry technical debt, or shortcuts taken during development that make the code harder to optimize later. When you're racing toward a deadline, it's tempting to implement features in whatever way gets them working quickly, rather than in the most efficient way. Usually when a developer is forced to take this route, they fully intend to go back and fix it, but these timelines and the pressure coming from the powers that be up top never let this happen because it's good enough, right? These shortcuts end up accumulating over time, and by the time you're actually ready to optimize, you discover that fundamental changes to the engine could end up being required, which would just be way too much time and money for the powers that be to let this happen. And before we go further, I think it's important to understand what optimization actually is, because there's a lot of confusion around this term. Optimization isn't some magical make the game run better button that developers can press. It's a fundamental aspect of software development. This needs to be considered from the very beginning of a project. At its core, optimization is about making efficient use of the hardware resources available. This means writing code that doesn't waste CPU cycles, managing memory allocation properly, ensuring that the graphics pipeline doesn't have unnecessary bottlenecks, and making sure that different systems within the game can work together without interfering with each other. And there's a crucial distinction that many people miss between a game that's demanding and a game that's poorly optimized. And understanding this difference is key to recognizing when developers are actually failing their customers. A demanding game pushes hardware to the limits, but does it consistently and predictably. Take a game like Cyberpunk 2077 today, after its major updates. With ray tracing enabled at maximum settings, it will absolutely bring even the most powerful graphics cards to their knees. But it does so in a way that makes sense. More complex lighting effects require more computational power, higher resolution textures need more VRAM, and so on and so on and so on. Most importantly, a demanding game scales well across different hardware levels. Players with older systems can still enjoy the game at lower settings, while players with cutting-edge rigs get the premium experience. A poorly optimized game, on the other hand, runs inconsistently regardless of hardware power. This is ultimately what I think we're seeing with Monster Hunter Wilds. Players with identical setups get completely different performance. The game might run fine for 10 minutes and then suddenly start stuttering for no apparent reason. Frame rates might be acceptable in some areas, but completely unplayable in others. Even when there's no obvious difference in what's happening on screen, it just still seems to drop frames everywhere or stutter or just break entirely. Let me give you a more specific example of how poor optimization could manifest. In a well-optimized game, when you enter a new area, assets are loaded efficiently in the background. The game predicts what texture models you'll need based on where you're moving and loads them ahead of time. Memory is then managed carefully so that unused assets are cleared out to make room for new ones. In a poorly optimized game like Monster Hunter Wilds, this process just kind of breaks down. The game might try to load all the textures for an entire area at once, causing massive frame drops, or it might fail to predict what assets you'll need, causing stuttering every time you turn a corner, and then the game scrambles to load new textures. Memory management might be so poor that the game runs out of VRAM even on high-end cards, or so aggressive that it's constantly loading and unloading the same assets repeatedly. One specific technical issue that's become increasingly common is actually shader compilation stuttering. Modern games use complex shaders, which are small programs that run on your graphics card to create lighting, shadows, and other visual effects. These shaders need to be compiled specifically for your hardware configuration, and poorly optimized games often do this compilation at the worst possible times. A well-optimized game will compile shaders during loading screens or when you first start the game, getting all of this work done when it won't impact gameplay. A poorly optimized game will try to compile shaders on the fly during gameplay, causing those characteristic stutters every time a new visual effect appears on screen. When people complain about optimization, there's always someone who responds with, "Just upgrade your hardware, bro," but this fundamentally misses the point of what optimization is supposed to achieve. Good optimization isn't about making games run well only on the most expensive hardware. It's about making games run appropriately across a wide range of systems. Consider this: the Steam hardware survey shows that the most common graphics card among Steam users is still something like a GTX 1060 or RTX 3060. These aren't cutting-edge cards, but they're still perfectly capable of running modern games at reasonable settings. When a game can't acceptably run on hardware that represents the majority of your potential customer base, that's not a hardware problem, that's a development problem. Moreover, poor optimization affects everyone, not just people with older hardware. Even if you have an RTX 4090, the most powerful consumer graphics card available, I think, unless it's changed, poor optimization can still cause stuttering, crashes, and inconsistent performance that ruins the overall experience. And here's what the industry doesn't want you to fully grasp. When a game launches with serious optimization problems, it's not usually an accident or an oversight. Sometimes it's a calculated business decision. Developers and publishers are betting that they can fix the problems after launch while still capturing the majority of sales during the crucial first few weeks. This strategy works because of how game sales are distributed. The vast majority of games' lifetime sales happen within the first month after launch. By the time word spreads about optimization problems, most of the people who were going to buy the game have already done so. Sure, some people will refund it and future sales might be impacted, but the financial damage is often manageable compared to the cost of delaying the game to fix these issues properly. What's particularly frustrating, at least to me, is that developers usually know about these problems problems months before launch. Internal testing reveals frame rate issues, crash reports pile up, and QA teams document the problems extensively, but fixing optimization issues properly often requires fundamental changes to how the game is built. Changes that could require months and months of additional development time and millions of dollars possibly in additional costs. So, instead of delaying the game and disappointing the almighty shareholders, the decision gets made to ship the game in a compromised state, hoping to fix it post-launch. The problem is that major optimization overhauls are incredibly difficult to implement after a game is already complete. So you're essentially just trying to rebuild the foundation of a house while people are currently living in it. For players, the cost of this approach goes far beyond just poor performance. When you buy a game at full price and you can't play it properly, you're not just losing money, you're losing time, excitement, and trust. Think about that poor guy who took time off work to play Monster Hunter Wilds, or maybe other people who arranged gaming sessions with friends only to spend that time troubleshooting technical problems instead of actually playing. To me, that sounds pretty devastating. There's also an opportunity cost. The time you spend trying to get Monster Hunter Wilds to run properly is time you could be spending playing other games that actually work. In a market where there are more great games being released than any one person realistically could possibly play, in a market where there are more great games being released than any one person could possibly play, technical problems don't just ruin the experience of one game. They actively push players towards competitors. And I mean, the damage to franchises can sometimes be permanent. Look at the Arkham series. Despite Batman Arkham Knight eventually being fixed, it did kind of kill momentum for the franchise. There haven't been any new single-player Arkham games since then, and I kind of feel like part of that has to be due to the damaged reputation from the PC launch disaster. Cyberpunk 2077 might be an even clearer example. Despite massive improvements over the last few years, and despite the Phantom Liberty expansion being genuinely excellent, the game has never fully recovered its reputation. When talking about the game, you almost always have to acknowledge the issues from the beginning. CD Projekt Red went from being one of the most trusted names in gaming to being viewed with some skepticism by quite a few players. I mean, you think about it, when people talk about CD Projekt Red, they're always going to say, oh, that launch of Cyberpunk was pretty rough. I was super excited for that game and oof, that was just bad. I don't know if I want to deal with that with like Witcher 4, for example. Now, to be fair, game development is incredibly challenging and optimization is particularly difficult. There is an art to that I don't actually know how to do. I just understand the kind of overview of it. Modern games are more complex than they were even 10 years ago. You're dealing with multiple hardware configurations, different operating systems, various driver versions, and an almost infinite number of possible configurations. Publishers also face legitimate financial pressures. Game development costs have skyrocketed, while game prices have remained relatively stable when adjusted for inflation. Missing a key release window like the holiday season can mean the difference between profit and loss for an entire project. But here's the thing, these challenges aren't new and other developers do manage to overcome them. When you look at studios like ID Software with Doom Eternal or Insomniac Games with their Spider-Man series, you see that it's absolutely possible to create technically impressive games that run well across a wide range of hardware. It's simply a matter of priorities and planning. What's happening with Monster Hunter Wilds is part of a much larger crisis in the gaming industry. The systematic erosion of trust between developers and players every time a major game launches in a broken state, it damages the implicit contract that players have with the industry. I mean, we pay full price for games with the expectation that they'll work properly, and when they don't, it makes players a lot more cautious about future purchases. This trust erosion has real economic consequences. Pre-order numbers for major releases, because we don't pre-order, guys, no pre-order, they have been declining as players become more wary of committing to games before they can see how they actually perform. No pre-orders, guys. Day one sales are being replaced by wait-and-see attitudes, where players will hold off on purchases until they can confirm that games actually work properly. And no one trusts the industry reviewers. We wait for like our favorite streamer or content creator to see if we actually want to play the game. Poor PC optimization also feeds into the broader platform wars between PC and console gaming. When major releases consistently run poorly on PC while working fine on consoles, it reinforces the narrative that PC gaming is too complicated and unreliable for mainstream for mainstream audiences. This pushes potential PC players towards consoles and reduces the overall PC gaming market. Or at least in theory. Maybe that's what the game studios want to do all along. The irony is that PC gaming offers tremendous advantages: higher frame rates, better graphics, mod support, and generally a superior experience when games are properly optimized. And guess what? PC gaming is here to stay. Interestingly, the optimization crisis is largely limited to AAA development. Indie games and smaller studio releases often run beautifully with a wide range of hardware. Now, this isn't because indie games are less technically ambitious, but because smaller teams are often forced to be more careful about optimization since they don't have the budget to patch problems post-launch. This creates a kind of a perverse situation where a high-dollar AAA game might run worse than a $20 indie title. Despite having hundreds of times the development budget, it's contributing to a shift in player preferences towards smaller, more polished experiences over big-budget spectacles that don't actually work properly. There's also an uncomfortable relationship between game developers and hardware manufacturers that affects optimization priorities. Companies like Nvidia and AMD have significant influence over game development through their developer program, sponsorship deals, and proprietary technologies. Sometimes this leads to games being optimized primarily for the latest hardware from a specific manufacturer, leaving owners of older competing software with subpar experiences. The focus becomes showing off the new technology rather than ensuring broad compatibility and smooth performance. So, I think it's clear the gaming industry needs to fundamentally reassess its priorities when it comes to technical quality. This isn't just about individual developers doing better work, it's about systemic changes to how games are developed, funded, and released. Maybe throw in a little bit more respect for the customer. I don't know, that might go a long way. But first, we need longer development cycles that actually account for optimization time. Currently, most game development schedules treat optimization as something that happens at the end of the project, when there's no time left to make fundamental changes. Optimization realistically needs to be considered throughout the entire development process. Second, I feel like we need better industry standards for what constitutes an acceptable release date. Right now, there's not really a clear definition of what performance benchmarks a game needs to meet before it can be considered ready for release. And this, I think, leads to wildly inconsistent quality standards across different developers and publishers. One potential solution is broader use of genuine early access programs and beta testing, not the marketing-focused betas that happen a week before launch, but real extended testing periods where optimization problems can be identified and fixed before the game reaches general release. However, this only works if developers are willing to delay releases based on beta feedback. Too often, beta testing becomes just another marketing opportunity rather than a genuine quality assurance measure. It also could help for players to become more educated about technical issues and more demanding about quality standards. The current tolerance for broken releases only further encourages publishers to continue shipping unfinished games. If enough players consistently refuse to buy games with serious technical problems, the financial incentives would shift towards better optimization, and I actually think this is starting to happen already. Looking forward, some emerging technologies might help with optimization challenges. Machine learning-based optimization tools are becoming more and more sophisticated, potentially allowing developers to automatically identify and fix performance bottlenecks. However, a technical solution like this won't address the fundamental problem, which is the industry's current approach to prioritizing release schedules over technical quality. So where does this leave Monster Hunter Wilds specifically? Based on similar cases and Capcom's track record, we're probably looking at months of patches before the game reaches the performance level it should have had at launch, if we even get that at all. There's some hope that the upcoming update at the end of June might bring some improvements, but major optimization overhauls typically take much longer. Overall, the community has largely lost faith in Capcom's ability to deliver stable performance quickly. Comments from players suggest that many are simply waiting for major optimization updates rather than continuing to struggle with the current version, and I don't blame them. This is exactly the kind of situation that kills a game's momentum permanently. But hey, they got their money, so do they really care? Monster Hunter Wilds represents everything that's wrong with modern AAA game development. A potentially incredible experience ruins not entirely by poor design or lack of content, that's a different video, but by fundamental technical incompetence that should never have made it past internal testing. I mean, maybe it didn't, and boss man ignored it and shoved it out the door anyway. That's entirely possible. Like, this isn't even just about one game or one company. It's about an industry that has normalized shipping broken products and expecting customers to accept compromised experiences while waiting for fixes that may or may not ever fully address the problems. But the players have spoken with their reviews, and their message is crystal clear. Great gameplay cannot save a game that simply doesn't work. Technical excellence isn't optional. It's the foundation that everything else is built on. So, until the industry as a whole accepts this reality, we're going to keep seeing potential masterpieces turned into cautionary tales. I mean, as consumers, we do have more power than we often realize. Every purchase decision, every review, every refund request sends a signal about what we're willing to accept. If we want better games, we need to demand better standards and stop rewarding companies that prioritize release schedules and the almighty shareholders over quality. At the end of the day, Monster Hunter Wilds could have been 2025's defining gaming experience. The art design, the monster encounters, the world design. This could have been Game of the Year. Instead, it's just become another entry in the growing list of games killed by poor optimization. The saddest part, to me at least, is that somewhere underneath all the technical problems is still a fun game, and most players will never get to experience it that way. And that's not just a loss for those players, it's a loss for the entire medium. Until Capcom fixes these fundamental issues with Monster Hunter Wilds, it will remain a beautiful but ambitious failure, not killed by poor design, but killed by the inexcusable decision to ship a broken product and hope nobody would notice. But guess what? We did. Anyway, what are your thoughts on this optimization crisis? Have you experienced these problems with Monster Hunter Wilds or other recent releases? Are you as frustrated as I am with the industry's acceptance of broken launches? Let me know in the comments below. The next time a major game launches with serious technical problems, remember Monster Hunter Wilds, remember the great games that deserve great execution, and remember that we have the power to demand better. That's all I've got for you today. To me, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have a fantastic day, and peace out.